The morning sun blazed down on the dusty Texas trail like a furnace, and Sam Mackenzie pulled his worn hat lower over his eyes. His horse, Dusty, moved slowly beneath him, her steps matching the heavy rhythm of his thoughts. At 32 years old, Sam felt like he had lived 3 lifetimes, and none of them had ended well. The bottle in his saddlebag called to him, but he ignored it for now. It was still early, and even a man as far gone as Sam had some rules left. The whiskey would wait until evening. When the memories got too loud to bear without help, he rode past a small creek, and the sound of running water reminded him of home. The Mackenzie ranch had been blessed with good water, his father used to say. "Water is life out here, son," the old man would tell him while they watched cattle drink from the stream that ran through their land. "Take care of the water, and it'll take care of you." Sam had tried to take care of everything. The ranch, the cattle, his younger brother Tommy, even their neighbors when times got tough. But sometimes trying isn't enough. Sometimes the world has other plans. The drought had started 3 years ago. At first it seemed like just another dry spell. Texas had plenty of those, and the Mackenzie family had weathered them before. But this one was different. Month after month passed with no rain. The grass turned brown, then disappeared entirely. The creek that had always run clear and steady began to slow, then became a trickle, then nothing but cracked mud. Sam had watched their cattle grow thin and weak. He'd sold off half the herd at terrible prices, hoping to keep the rest alive until the rains came. They never did. By the second year, he was borrowing money from the bank in town, using the ranch as collateral. The banker, a thin man with cold eyes, had smiled when Sam signed the papers. "Don't worry, Mackenzie," the banker had said. "Rain always comes eventually," but it hadn't come in time. The remaining cattle died, and the bank took the ranch. Sam still remembered the day he and Tommy had to pack up their few belongings and leave the only home they'd ever known. His little brother had been 23 then, full of hope despite everything. "We'll start over, Sam," Tommy had said, loading their father's old rifle into the wagon. "Maybe this is God's way of telling us to try something new." Tommy had always been the optimist in the family. Even as a child, he could find something good in the worst situations. When their parents died in a carriage accident when Sam was 18 and Tommy was 9, it was Tommy who had comforted Sam, not the other way around. "At least we still have each other," Tommy had said that terrible day, his small hand in Sam's as they stood beside their parents' graves. They had wandered from town to town after losing the ranch, taking whatever work they could find. Sam was good with horses, and Tommy had a way with people that made him welcome anywhere. They worked on other people's ranches, helped with cattle drives, and did odd jobs in small towns. It wasn't the life they'd planned, but they were together. And that was enough. Then came the cough. It started small, just a little thing that Tommy would do after working in dusty conditions. Sam didn't think much of it at first. Everyone coughed after a day of moving cattle or working in the barn. But Tommy's cough got worse. It kept him awake at night, and soon it was keeping Sam awake too. "Maybe we should see a doctor," Sam had suggested one evening as they sat by their campfire outside the town of Sweetwater. "It's just a cough," Tommy had replied, but his voice was weaker than usual. "I'll be fine." The doctor in Sweetwater had examined Tommy and given them the news. That changed everything. Consumption, the disease that had killed so many people on the frontier. There was no cure, the doctor explained kindly. Tommy might have months, maybe a year if he was lucky. "Keep him comfortable," the doctor had said, "and try to keep his spirits up. Sometimes that's all we can do." Sam had spent their last savings on medicine that didn't work and food that Tommy couldn't keep down. He'd held his brother through the long nights when the coughing fits were so bad that Tommy couldn't breathe. He'd listened to Tommy's stories about the ranch they'd build together someday, the family Tommy wanted to have, the horses they'd raise. Tommy died on a cold February morning, just as the sun was coming up. His last words were, "Take care of yourself, Sam. Promise me you'll take care of yourself." Sam had promised, but it was a promise he'd broken every day since. After the funeral, Sam had started drinking. Not just in the evenings, but during the day too. The bottle helped quiet the voices in his head that reminded him of everything he'd lost. His parents, the ranch, Tommy, and somewhere along the way. Himself, he'd been drifting for 2 years now, moving from town to town, taking work when he could find it and when he was sober enough to do it. Most employers took one look at his bloodshot eyes and shaking hands and moved on to the next man. Sam couldn't blame them. He wouldn't hire himself either. Dusty was the only constant in his life now. The Murray had been Tommy's horse, a gift from a rancher they'd worked for who had taken a liking to the young man's cheerful nature. After Tommy died, Sam couldn't bring himself to sell her. She was all he had left of his brother, and sometimes he caught himself talking to her as if she were Tommy. "What do you think, girl?" he'd ask her as they rode. "Think we'll find work in the next town?" Dusty would flick her ears as if she understood, and Sam would pretend that she did. The truth was, Sam was tired. Tired of wandering, tired of waking. Up with his head pounding and his heart empty, tired of living without purpose. Some nights, as he lay under the stars with only Dusty for company, he wondered if it would be easier to just give up entirely, but something kept him going. Maybe it was the promise he'd made to Tommy, or maybe it was just stubbornness. The Mackenzie family had never been quitters, his father used to say. Even when Sam felt like he had nothing left to give, he'd climb back on Dusty and keep riding Dadas. The sun climbed higher in the sky. Sam squinted ahead at the road. There was supposed to be a town called Cedar Creek about 10 miles ahead. Maybe they'd have work for a man who knew horses. Maybe they'd have a saloon where he could forget his troubles for another night. He didn't know it yet, but this day would be different from all the others. This day would be the beginning of something new, something that would remind him why promises were worth keeping and why hope was worth holding on to for now. Though he just rode forward one step at a time, the way he'd been doing for 2 long years. The heat was getting worse as Sam rode toward Cedar Creek, and his head was starting to pound. He'd had more whiskey than usual the night before, trying to forget the dream about Tommy that kept coming back. In the dream, his brother was still alive, still making plans for their future, still believing that good things were possible. Sam wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve and squinted at the road ahead. The sun was directly overhead now, beating down on the dusty trail. Without mercy. Dusty was moving slower too, her head hanging low as they made their way across the empty landscape. That's when he saw it. At first, it was just a dark shape in the distance, shimmering in the heat like a mirage. But as they got closer, Sam could make out the outline of a covered wagon sitting beside the trail. Something about it looked wrong, though. It was tilted at an odd angle, like it had been there for a while. Sam's first instinct was to ride past, without stopping. He'd learned to mind his own business over the past 2 years. Getting involved in other people's problems usually led to trouble, and he had enough trouble of his own. But something made him slow Dusty to a walk as they approached. The wagon was in bad shape. The canvas cover was torn in several places, and personal belongings were scattered on the ground nearby. Most telling of all, the rear wheel was completely destroyed, split apart like someone had taken an axe to it. No one was fixing a wheel like that without proper tools and materials. Sam was about to ride on when he heard something that made him stop. Singing. Someone was singing in Spanish. Soft, gentle melody that seemed completely out of place in the harsh wilderness. The voice was female, and it was coming from somewhere near the wagon. Curiosity got the better of him. Sam dismounted and led Dusty closer, his hand resting on the gun at his hip out of habit. You never knew what kind of situation you might be walking into out here. As he rounded the front of the wagon, he saw her. A woman sat in the shade on the far side of the wagon, her back against one of the large wheels. She was wearing a simple blue dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She couldn't have been more than 25, with the kind of face that suggested she'd been pretty before hard times had touched her, but it wasn't her appearance that stopped Sam in his tracks. It was the way she looked at him when she noticed his approach. There was no fear in her eyes, no panic at seeing a rough-looking stranger appear out of nowhere. Instead, she simply stopped singing and watched him with what seemed like calm curiosity. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that made the words sound musical. I was wondering when someone would come along this road. Sam stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. He'd expected to find someone desperate, maybe crying or calling for help. Instead, he found a woman who seemed as composed as if she was sitting in her own parlor rather than stranded in the middle of nowhere. "Afternoon," he managed to say, touching the brim of his hat. "Looks like you're having some trouble." She glanced at the broken wheel and then back at him, and that's when it happened. She smiled. It wasn't a forced smile or a nervous one. It was genuine and warm, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. It was the kind of smile that said she was genuinely pleased to see him, despite the fact that he probably looked like he'd been sleeping in ditches for a week. Sam felt something shift inside his chest, something he hadn't felt in so long he'd forgotten what it was like. For just a moment, the weight he'd been carrying seemed a little lighter. "Yes, I suppose I am," she said, still smiling. "My name is Elena Vasquez, and you are?" "Sam Mackenzie," he heard himself say. "And you're right about the trouble. That wheel's done for," Elena nodded, seeming unsurprised by this news. "I figured as much. It made a terrible sound when it broke yesterday evening. I'm afraid I don't know much about fixing wagons." "Yesterday evening?" Sam looked around at the empty landscape. "You've been here all night?" "And most of today," Elena said calmly. "I have some water and a little food, so I thought I'd wait and see if anyone came along who might be able to help. I was starting to think I might have to start walking." Sam stared at her. Any other woman in her situation would have been in tears by now, or at least showing signs of fear. But Elena seemed perfectly at ease, as if being stranded in the wilderness was just another everyday problem to be solved. "Walking to where?" he asked. "Cedar Creek, I hope." "I'm traveling to Dallas to stay with my sister, but I was told Cedar Creek was the next town on this road." "It is?" Sam confirmed. "About 8 miles ahead. But that's a long walk in this heat, especially for a woman alone." Elena's smile never faltered. "I've walked long distances before, though I admit I'd prefer to ride if possible." Sam found himself stepping closer to examine the broken wheel, though he already knew what he'd find. The damage was too severe for a roadside repair. The wheel would need to be completely replaced, and that meant getting the wagon to a town. "With a blacksmith? You got family waiting for you in Dallas?" he asked as he crouched down beside the wreckage. "My sister Rosa," Elena said. "She's been asking me to come stay with her for months now. I finally decided it was time." There was something in her voice when she said this, a note of sadness that made Sam look up at her. For the first time since he'd found her, Elena's composure seemed to crack just a little. "You running from something?" he asked gently. Elena was quiet for a moment, looking out at the empty prairie. "Not running," she said finally. "Just moving toward something better, I hope." Sam understood that feeling. He'd been trying to move toward something better for 2 years now, though he'd never quite figured out what that something was. "Well," he said, standing up and dusting off his hands, "this wheel's not going anywhere. But I might be able to help you get to Cedar Creek." Elena looked at him with those same warm eyes, and Sam felt that strange lightness in his chest again. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Mackenzie, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," Sam said, surprised to find that he meant it. "I was heading there anyway, and Dusty here can carry 2 people if needed." As if she understood her name, Dusty nickered softly from where she stood nearby. Elena looked at the horse and then back at Sam, and that smile appeared again. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I have a few things I'd need to bring with me." "Whatever you need," Sam said, and he meant that too. As Elena began gathering her belongings, Sam found himself wondering what had just happened to him. Half an hour ago, he'd been riding towards Cedar Creek with nothing but another night of drinking on his mind. Now he was offering to help a complete stranger, and for some reason, the prospect of helping her made him feel more alive than he had in months. Maybe it was that smile of hers. Or maybe it was the way she'd looked at him, not like he was a broken down drunk, but like he was someone worth talking to, whatever it was. Sam Mackenzie was about to discover that sometimes the best things in life happen when you least expect them. Sam walked around the wagon one more time, checking every part of it to make sure he hadn't missed anything. The more he looked, the worse it got. The wheel wasn't just broken, it was completely ruined. The wooden spokes had snapped in several places, and the iron rim was bent beyond repair. Even if he had the right tools, which he didn't, fixing this would take days. "I hate to tell you this," he said to Elena, "but there's no way to fix this wheel out here. It needs to be completely replaced, and that means getting to a town with a proper blacksmith." Elena nodded, still sitting calmly in the shade. "I thought as much. The sound it made when it broke was like thunder. I'm just grateful it didn't happen while I was going down a hill." Sam looked at her with growing amazement. Here was a woman stranded in the middle of nowhere, and she was finding things to be grateful for. It had been so long since he'd met someone with that kind of attitude that he'd almost forgotten such people existed. "How long have you been traveling?" he asked, settling down on the ground nearby. Something about Elena made him want to stay and talk, which was unusual for him. These days he preferred to keep conversations short and avoid getting to know people. 3 weeks, she said. "I started in Santa Fe and was hoping to reach Dallas by the end of the month. I suppose I'll be a little late now." That's a long journey for a woman alone, Sam observed. Most people would travel with a group or hire someone to go with them. Elena was quiet for a moment, looking out at the vast prairie that stretched in all directions. "I couldn't afford to hire anyone, and I didn't want to wait for a group. Sometimes you have to do things on your own, even if it's not the safest way." There was something in her voice that made Sam think there was more to her story. He found himself genuinely curious about this woman who could sit so peacefully beside a broken wagon in the middle of nowhere. "You said you were going to stay with your sister in Dallas," he said. "What's in Santa Fe that you're leaving behind?" Elena smiled, but this time it was different, sadder somehow. "My husband is buried there. Was buried there. I stayed for 2 years after he died, but I finally realized I was just making myself miserable by staying in a place that reminded me of him every day." Sam felt a familiar pang in his chest. He knew something about losing people you loved, about places that held too many memories. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Thank you," Elena said. "He was a good man." His name was Miguel, and he was a carpenter. He could build anything with his hands, tables, chairs, even houses. He was working on a new church in our town when some men came through looking for trouble. She paused, and Sam waited patiently for her to continue. He'd learned that sometimes people needed time to find the right words for painful things. "Miguel wasn't a fighter," Elena continued. "He was gentle and kind, the sort of man who would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. But when those men started threatening people in the town, especially the women and children, he couldn't just stand by and watch." Sam nodded, understanding completely. He would have done the same thing in Miguel's place. "They shot him in the street in front of the church he'd been working on," Elena said quietly. "He died trying to protect people he barely knew." "That takes courage," Sam said. "Not many men would do that." Elena's smile returned, warmer this time. "That's what I loved about him. He always saw the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. He used to say that every person had something good inside them, even if it was buried deep." Sam found himself thinking about Tommy, who used to say similar things. His brother had believed in the goodness of people right up until the end, even when their own lives were falling apart. "What about you?" Elena asked gently. "You mentioned you were heading to Cedar Creek. Are you looking for work?" Sam nodded. "I'm good with horses. Sometimes I can find work at ranches or helping people who need animals trained. I move around a lot, go where the work is." "That sounds like a lonely life," Elena observed. Sam looked at her in surprise. Most people didn't see past the surface of his wandering existence. They saw a drifter, someone who couldn't or wouldn't settle down. But Elena had seen straight to the heart of it, the loneliness that ate at him every day. "It can be," he admitted. "But it's easier than staying in one place and remembering what you've lost." Elena studied his face with those knowing eyes. "What did you lose?" Sam hesitated. He hadn't talked about his past with anyone in months. It was too painful, and most people didn't really want to hear about other people's troubles anyway. But something about Elena made him want to tell her the truth. My family had a ranch, he said slowly. Not a big one, but it was ours. My parents left it to me and my younger brother when they died. We worked hard, tried to make it succeed, but the drought came and took everything. The cattle died, the bank took the land, and then— He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Then what? Elena asked softly. Then my brother got sick, consumption. I spent everything I had left trying to help him, but nothing worked. He died 2 years ago, and I've been wandering ever since. Elena was quiet for a long moment, and Sam wondered if he'd said too much. But when he looked at her, he saw understanding in her eyes, not pity. What was your brother's name? She asked. Tommy. He was 9 years younger than me, but sometimes I think he was wiser than I'll ever be. He could find hope in the darkest situations. Even when he was dying, he kept talking about the future, about the ranch we'd build together someday. He sounds like he was a lot like Miguel, Elena said. The kind of person who makes the world a little brighter just by being in it. Sam nodded, surprised by how good it felt to talk about Tommy with someone who understood. He was. After he died, I felt like I'd lost the best part of myself along with him. Elena reached over and gently touched his arm. Maybe you didn't lose it. Maybe it's just buried deep, like Miguel used to say. Sam looked at her hand on his arm, feeling something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. It was small and fragile, like a tiny flame in the darkness, but it was there, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Elena began unpacking some supplies from her wagon. She had a small bag of beans, some dried meat, and a pot for cooking. Without asking, she began preparing a simple meal. You don't have to do that, Sam said. I've got some food in my saddlebags. I know I don't have to, Elena replied, starting a small fire with practiced efficiency, but I want to. Besides, food always tastes better when it's shared. As they sat by the fire waiting for the beans to cook, Sam realized something that surprised him. He hadn't thought about drinking once since he'd found Elena. The bottle in his saddlebag, which usually called to him constantly, had been forgotten completely. Instead, he found himself watching Elena as she stirred the pot, humming softly to herself. There was something peaceful about her presence, something that made the constant ache in his chest feel a little less sharp. Why aren't you afraid? He asked suddenly. Elena looked up from the fire. Afraid of what? Of me. Of being alone out here, of what's going to happen next. Most people in your situation would be terrified. Elena considered this for a moment. I suppose I've learned that being afraid doesn't change anything. When Miguel died, I was terrified of being alone, of having to face the world without him. But I discovered that I was stronger than I thought. Fear is just another burden to carry, and I've decided not to carry it anymore. Sam stared at her, amazed by her strength. Here was a woman who had lost everything, just like he had, but instead of letting it break her, she'd found a way to keep going with grace and dignity. As they ate their simple meal under the stars, Sam found himself talking more than he had. In months, he told Elena about the ranch, about the horses he'd loved, about the dreams he and Tommy had shared. And Elena listened, really listened, in a way that made him feel heard and understood. For the first time in 2 years, Sam went to sleep without taking a drink. And for the first time in even longer, he felt like maybe tomorrow might bring something good. Sam woke up the next morning feeling different. For the first time in 2 years, his head didn't pound. His mouth didn't taste like sawdust, and he didn't feel like he wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. The early morning air was cool and fresh, and birds were singing in the distance. Elena was already awake, sitting by the dying embers of their campfire with a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked up when she heard him stirring and gave him that warm smile that had already become familiar. Good morning, she said softly. I hope you don't mind, but I made coffee. I thought you might want some before you start working on the wheel. Sam sat up and ran his hands through his hair, trying to make sense of how good he felt. You didn't have to do that, he said, but he was grateful. The coffee smelled better than anything he'd had in months. I wanted to, Elena replied, pouring him a cup from the small pot. Besides, I've been awake for a while, watching the sunrise. Have you ever noticed how beautiful the sky looks just before the sun comes up? Sam took the coffee and looked toward the eastern horizon, where the sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold. He had seen thousands of sunrises in his life, but he couldn't remember the last time he'd actually stopped to look at one. I guess I haven't been paying attention, he admitted. I think we forget to look at beautiful things when we're carrying too much pain, Elena said gently. But they're always there, waiting for us to notice them again. As Sam sipped his coffee, he found himself really looking at the world around them. The way the morning light made the grass shimmer, the sound of a meadowlark calling in the distance. The way Elena's hair caught the golden light as she moved. When had he stopped seeing these things? After breakfast, Sam walked over to examine the broken wheel again. In the clear morning light, he could see exactly what needed to be done. The wheel would need to be completely rebuilt, but he had an idea. There was enough usable wood in the wagon to make a temporary repair that would get them to Cedar Creek. This is going to take some time, he told Elena as he began sorting through the scattered pieces. Maybe 2 days if I do it right. That's fine, Elena said. I'm not in any hurry. Sam looked at her in surprise. Your sister isn't expecting you? She knows I'm coming, but I didn't give her an exact date. I learned long ago that life has its own schedule, and sometimes the best things happen when you're not rushing toward them. Sam nodded and began to work. He'd always been good with his hands, a skill his father had taught him when he was young. It felt good to be doing something useful again, something that required skill and patience rather than just getting through another day. As he worked, Elena didn't just sit and watch. She helped where she could, holding pieces of wood steady while he shaped them, bringing him water when he got thirsty, and keeping him company with gentle conversation. She told him stories about her childhood in Santa Fe, about her parents, who had run a small store, about the festivals they used to have in the town square. Miguel loved those festivals, she said as Sam carefully shaped a new spoke for the wheel. He wasn't much of a dancer, but he tried anyway. He used to step on my feet so much that I'd have bruises for days afterward. Sam smiled, the first genuine smile he'd had in months. My brother Tommy was the same way. He was determined to learn to dance before he died, said he wanted to be able to dance at his own wedding someday. I tried to teach him, but I wasn't much better than he was. Did you ever dance with anyone? Elena asked. Sam paused in his work, remembering. There was a girl in town when I was younger, Rebecca. She was the schoolteacher's daughter, and she had the prettiest blue eyes I'd ever seen. I was too shy to ask her to dance for the longest time. What happened? I finally worked up the courage to ask her at the harvest dance. She said yes, and I was so nervous I forgot everything I knew about dancing. But she was patient with me, and we danced 3 songs together. I thought I was in love. What happened to her? Sam's smile faded. She married the banker's son. Probably a smart choice. He had a future, and I was just a ranch hand's son with big dreams and no money. Elena stopped what she was doing and looked at him seriously. Dreams aren't worthless, Sam. Sometimes they're the most valuable things we have. As the day wore on, Sam found himself taking his time with the repair. He could have rushed it, made something that would just barely get them to town. But something about Elena's presence made him want to do good work, to create something he could be proud of. Elena seemed to understand this instinctively. She never hurried him or asked when he'd be finished. Instead, she found ways to make their temporary camp feel like home. She organized their supplies, mended a tear in the wagon's canvas cover, and even found some wildflowers to put in an empty jar. You don't have to do all that, Sam said, as he watched her arranging the flowers. No, Elena replied. But making a place beautiful, even temporarily, makes me feel more human. Does that make sense? Sam nodded. It did make sense. Everything about Elena made sense in a way that surprised him. She had a way of finding meaning in simple things, of creating beauty and comfort even in difficult circumstances. That evening, As they sat by their fire eating another simple meal, Sam realized something that shocked him. He was happy. Not just content or distracted, but genuinely happy. The constant ache in his chest was still there, but it was manageable now, like an old injury that only bothered him when the weather changed. "Can I ask you something?" he said as they watched the stars begin to appear. "Of course." "How do you do it? How do you stay so peaceful after everything you've been through?" Elena was quiet for a moment, stirring the fire with a stick. "I don't know if I have a good answer for that. After Miguel died, I was angry for a long time. Angry at the men who killed him, angry at God for letting it happen, angry at myself for not being able to save him somehow. What changed? I realized that my anger wasn't hurting anyone but me. Miguel was gone, and no amount of anger would bring him back. But I was still alive, and I had a choice. I could spend the rest of my life being angry and bitter, or I could try to honor his memory by being the kind of person he'd want me to be." Sam stared at her, amazed by her wisdom. "And what kind of person would that be?" Elena smiled. "Someone who looks for beauty instead of ugliness. Someone who helps others instead of just thinking about herself. Someone who believes that good things are still possible even after terrible things have happened." The next morning, Sam was putting the finishing touches on the wheel when they heard the sound of horses approaching. Elena looked up from where she was packing their supplies, and Sam saw a flash of concern cross her face. For the first time since he'd met her, 3 men rode up to their camp, and Sam didn't like the look of them. They were rough-looking, with the kind of hard eyes that said they were used to taking what they wanted. The leader, a thin man with a scraggly beard, grinned when he saw Elena. Well, the man said, dismounting from his horse. "What do we have here?" "A pretty little woman all alone with just one man to protect her." Sam straightened up slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. "The lady's not alone," he said quietly. "And she's under my protection." The leader laughed, and his companions moved to flank him. "Your protection? Look at you, friend. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks. You sure you want to try protecting anyone?" Sam felt something stirring inside him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Anger, but not the bitter, self-destructive anger he'd carried for 2 years. This was clean anger, the kind that came from seeing something worth protecting threatened. "I'm sure," he said, his voice steady. Elena stepped closer to Sam, and he could feel her presence beside him, calm and trusting. She believed in him, even when he wasn't sure he believed in himself. "Look, friend," the leader said, "we don't want any trouble. We just want to be friendly. Maybe share your fire, share your food, share your woman." That's when Sam realized something important. For the first time in 2 years, he had something worth fighting for. Not just Elena, though protecting her was important, but the man he was becoming when he was with her, the man who could find beauty in sunrises and take pride in good work and believe that tomorrow might be better than today. "Walk away," Sam said, his hand now resting on his gun. "Walk away now, and nobody gets hurt." The leader's grin faded, and Sam saw him calculating his chances. After a long moment, the man shrugged and remounted his horse. "Another time, maybe," he said. But Sam could see in his eyes that there wouldn't be another time. Something in Sam's stance, in his voice, had convinced them that he meant business. As the 3 men rode away, Sam felt Elena's hand touch his arm gently. "Thank you," she said simply. Sam looked at her and realized that something fundamental had changed inside him. He was no longer the broken man who had found her beside the wagon. He was someone worth protecting, someone worth believing in, and for the first time in 2 years, Sam Mackenzie felt like he might have a future worth living. With the wheel repaired and the confrontation with the Rough Riders behind them, Sam and Elena finally loaded up the wagon and continued their journey toward Cedar Creek. The makeshift wheel Sam had crafted held steady, and Elena's wagon rolled smoothly along the dusty trail, but something had changed between them during those 2 days by the broken wagon. They weren't just 2 strangers helping each other anymore. Sam found himself stealing glances at Elena as she sat beside him on the wagon seat, and he caught her looking at him too, with that same warm smile that had first captured his attention. Tell me about your sister, Sam said as they rode, wanting to know more about the woman who would be waiting for Elena in Dallas. Rosa is 2 years older than me, Elena replied, adjusting her bonnet against the morning sun. She married a shopkeeper named Carlos and moved to Dallas 5 years ago. She's been writing to me ever since Miguel died, asking me to come stay with them. What kind of shop does her husband run? General goods. Tools, fabric, food, anything people need. Rosa says, Dallas is growing fast, and there's always work for people who aren't afraid to work hard. Sam nodded, filing away this information. He'd been thinking about what would happen when they reached Dallas, and he didn't like the idea of saying goodbye to Elena. She'd become more important to him than he'd realized, and the thought of riding away from her made his chest feel tight. They reached Cedar Creek by late afternoon, and Sam was pleased to see that his wheel repair had held perfectly. The town was small but busy, with a main street lined with shops and a blacksmith's forge, sending sparks into the air. We should stay here tonight, Sam suggested. Get some proper food and rest before the final push to Dallas. Elena agreed, and Sam found them rooms at the town's only hotel. It felt strange to sleep in a real bed after months of camping under the stars, but Sam slept better than he had in years. The next morning, over breakfast in the hotel dining room, Elena surprised him with a question. Sam, what will you do after we reach Dallas? Where will you go next? Sam had been dreading this question because he honestly didn't know the answer. For 2 years, he'd been drifting from place to place with no real purpose other than avoiding his memories. But now, the idea of wandering aimlessly no longer appealed. To him, I'm not sure, he said honestly. I suppose I'll look for work, same as always. Elena was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Carlos is always saying he needs good men to help with deliveries and managing the store. Dallas has a lot of ranches nearby, and people always need someone who knows horses. Sam looked at her, hope rising in his chest. Are you saying there might be work for me in Dallas? I'm saying there might be a place for you there, if you wanted to stay. The word stay hung between them, heavy with possibility. Sam had been moving for so long that the idea of staying anywhere seemed foreign. But staying near Elena, that was different. I'd like that, he said quietly. Elena's smile was brighter than the morning sun streaming through the hotel window. They spent 4 more days on the road to Dallas, and Sam treasured every mile. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their past and dreams for the future. Elena told him about the small garden she wanted to plant, and Sam found himself talking about the horses he'd like to train again on the 3rd night. As they sat by their campfire under a canopy of stars, Elena asked him something that made his heart skip. Sam, do you think Tommy would have liked me? Sam didn't hesitate. He would have loved you. He always said that the best people were the ones who could find light in dark places. That's exactly what you are, Elena. You're light. Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft. Miguel used to say something similar. He said that some people are like candles in a dark room. They don't make everything bright, but they make it possible to find your way. You've helped me find my way, Sam said, and he meant it completely. That night, Elena moved closer to him by the fire, and Sam felt brave enough to put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, and they sat there watching the flames dance, both of them understanding that something important was happening between them. When they finally reached Dallas, Sam was amazed by how much the city had grown. There were new buildings everywhere, and the streets were busy with people and wagons. Elena directed him to her sister's shop, and Sam felt nervous as they pulled up in front of it. Rosa came running out before they'd even stopped the wagon, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her sister. She was a plump, cheerful woman who immediately reminded Sam of Tommy in the way she seemed to radiate warmth and kindness. Elena, mi amor, you made it, Rosa cried, holding her sister tight. I was so worried about you traveling alone. I wasn't alone, Elena said, looking at Sam with a smile. Sam helped me when my wagon broke down. I don't know what I would have done without him. Rosa turned to Sam with the same warm eyes as her sister. Then you are family now, Mr. Mackenzie. Any man who helps my sister is family. Carlos, Rosa's husband, was equally welcoming. He was a tall, thin man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Within an hour of meeting Sam, he was offering him work at the store and a place to stay in the room above the shop. "We can always use another pair of strong hands," Carlos said. "And Elena tells me you know horses." Half our business comes from ranchers who need supplies, and they respect a man who knows their animals. Sam accepted gratefully, and within a week, he felt like he'd found a new family. Rosa fussed over him like a mother, Carlos treated him like a brother, and Elena was something he was still trying to understand. They fell into a comfortable routine. Sam worked at the store during the day, helping customers and making deliveries to nearby ranches. Elena found work as a seamstress, and her skilled hands was soon in high demand among the ladies of Dallas. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch behind the shop, talking quietly or simply enjoying each other's company. 3 months after arriving in Dallas, Sam finally worked up the courage to ask Elena the question that had been burning in his heart. "Elena," he said one evening as they sat watching the sunset, "I know it hasn't been long since we met, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. Would you consider marrying me?" Elena turned to look at him, and that same smile that had first captured his heart beside the broken wagon appeared on her face. "I was wondering when you'd ask," she said softly. "Yes, Sam, I would be honored to be your wife." They were married 2 months later in a small ceremony at the local church. Rosa cried happy tears throughout the entire service, and Carlos beamed with pride as he walked Elena down the aisle. Sam had never been happier in his life. The years that followed were the best of Sam's life. He and Elena bought a small house on the outskirts of Dallas, with enough land for Elena's garden and a few horses. Sam started his own business buying and training horses, and soon he had more work than he could handle. Elena's seamstress business grew too, and she became known throughout Dallas for her beautiful work. But more than that, she became known for her kindness, always ready to help a neighbor in need or comfort someone who was grieving. Sam often thought about Tommy during those happy years, and he knew his brother would have been proud of the man he'd become. The angry, bitter drifter who had found Elena beside that broken wagon was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to hope again, to love again, to believe in the future. One evening, 10 years after their first meeting, Sam and Elena sat on their porch watching their 2 young children play in the yard. Their son, named Tommy after Sam's brother, was teaching their daughter how to braid flower stems. "Do you ever think about that day I found you beside the wagon?" Sam asked, taking Elena's hand in his. Elena squeezed his hand gently. "Every day. Do you know what I was thinking when I first saw you riding up?" Sam shook his head. "I was thinking that God had finally sent me someone who needed healing as much as I did. We saved each other, Sam. We both know that." Sam brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You saved me first," with that smile. "I was ready to give up on everything, and then you smiled at me like I was worth saving." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "Maybe that's what love really is. Seeing something worth saving in someone, even when they can't see it in themselves." As the sun set over their happy home, Sam Mackenzie knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The broken cowboy was gone, healed by the love of a woman who had seen past his pain to the good man underneath. And every day, Elena's smile continued to remind him that even in the darkest times, hope was always possible. Their love story had begun beside a broken wagon on a dusty Texas road, but it had become something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved that sometimes the most broken things could be made whole again with the right kind of care. Sam never forgot the promise he'd made to his dying brother to take care of himself. With Elena by his side, he'd finally learned how to keep that promise, and in doing so, he discovered that taking care of yourself sometimes meant letting someone else help you heal.